Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Smacking his bag of holding, he produced the moonflower seed. The bone galleon and ghost mother both come from beyond the heavens. I guess these flowers must come from there too. Examining the seed for a long moment, he began to perfect his plan. Eventually, his eyes began to shine brightly. Ha ha ha, the heavens never truly bar one's way. He couldn't feel more pleased about the fact that the 4-point covenant really didn't say anything prohibiting him from planting flowers. Feeling very exhilarated, he walked out of his residence and looked around for a good place to plant the seed. Eventually, he rubbed his chin and murmured, "It probably isn't safe to plant it outside. These northerners are all so unreasonable. Whatever. I'll just plant it inside." Fully convinced that this was the best way to do it, he walked back inside and got to work. Although the ground in the cloud order was different from ordinary ground in some ways, in most ways, it was the same. It took a bit of work, but he managed to dig a sizable hole right in the middle of the room. Before long, he reached the white, fluffy soil that made up the land of the cloud, which also caused a bit of frigid chi to emanate up into the room. Eyes sparkling, he carefully placed the moonflower seed down into the cloud soil. Having accomplished that, he sat off to the side, eyes sparkling with anticipation and excitement. Almost as soon as the cloud soil was piled back over the seed, it began to tremble as if it were alive. It was a trembling that stemmed, not from fear, but from excitement. Even Bai Xiaochun could sense how emotional the seed was, and it caused his eyes to shine even more brightly. Be a good little moonflower, now. Grow fast and strong. Licking his lips, he spent the whole night standing watch. Very shortly after planting the seed, he could see the frigid chi streaming up from the cloud, nourishing it. By morning, the seed had sprouted. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun really felt like he was on an important mission, and spent day and night tending to the newly sprouted moonflower. Half a month went by in a flash, and he didn't leave his residence even once during that time. Meanwhile, the talk around the sect hadn't died down at all, and the cultivators were watching his residence closely. He wasn't in the mood to eavesdrop, he was completely focused on the moonflower. It was already about a hand high, and even had some tiny leaves. Bai Xiaochun was very happy. In terms of the leaf the baby girl had given him, he had already grafted it onto the moonflower. As the moonflower grew, the leaf began to build up frigid chi. Everything was going according to plan, and Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but laugh out loud at how things were going. Ha ha ha, there's nothing that Bai Xiaochun can't figure out how to do. Feeling more proud of himself than ever, he waited for another 7 days to pass. At this point, he started to feel slightly discontent. He had come to find that after grafting the leaf onto the moonflower, it was growing much slower. So slow. If things keep going like this, it'll never get enough frigid chi. Shaking his head, he contemplated the situation for a bit until he came up with an idea of how to catalyze the plant into faster growth. Normally speaking, catalyzing plants was easy to do. There were plenty of methods within the Tao of medicine to do such a thing. The easiest way was to use specific medicinal pills. After thinking about it for a bit longer, he looked around carefully, and then sent his divine sense outside. The 4-point covenant says that I can't concoct pills, or sell them. It doesn't say anything about feeding them to flowers. With that, he fished around in his bag of holding for a handful of medicinal pills, which he crushed and scattered over the moonflower. As soon as the powder landed, the flower twitched and began to glow with bright light. Almost immediately, it began to suck in the powder. As it did, the moonflower began to visibly grow faster. In fact, its roots actually extended further down into the cloud. That, in turn, allowed it to absorb more frigid chi, which instantly caused the temperature in Bai Xiaochun's residence to drop. Eyes shining with confidence, he took out some more medicinal pills, crushed them, and dropped them onto the moonflower. The moonflower was like a bottomless pit when it came to medicinal pill powder. It continued to grow larger, sending its roots even further down and out, until they filled a 300-meter area. Brimming with confidence, Bai Xiaochun continued to feed the plant medicinal pill powder. You like everything. What a precious little flower. Over the 3 short days which had passed, the moonflower had consumed over 100 different types of medicinal pills, and was now over a meter high. Its stalk was as thick as an arm, and it had hand-sized leaves. There was also a bud at the top of it which had not yet bloomed. Under Bai Xiaochun's care, the flower was growing at incredible speed. As for the leaf he had grafted onto it, one of its veins now looked like ice, which he was thrilled about. Soon, the moonflower's roots spread out to fill a 1,500-meter area, which caused Bai Xiaochun's smile to beam radiantly. Then, he pulled out more medicinal pills and began to crush them. If this were the river-defying sect or even the starry sky Dao polarity sect, Bai Xiaochun might have taken some time to think about the effects of the flower on the surroundings. But here in the north, he wasn't worried about it at all, and in fact, it didn't even occur to him to check. I'm not violating the 4-point covenant, he told himself. For the following half-month, he continuously crushed pills and fed them to the moonflower. The moonflower had already reached a shocking height and size, taking up almost all of his residence. He couldn't help but gasp at the sight of it. At the same time, he realized that, thanks to his constant care, the flower looked different from before. It almost seemed conscious in a way, and at the same time, apparently liked him. Every time he touched it, the flower would wriggle contentedly. When Bai Xiaochun saw that, his eyes glittered. You're conscious? Alright, be a good flower, now. You need to stop growing, otherwise my room is going to fall apart. Things aren't easy here in the north, so if you destroyed my house by growing too big, it could really cause some problems. After offering some more strict warnings, he took out some more medicinal pills to feed the flower. By this point, he didn't even need to crush them. He would just toss them to the flower, which would grab them with its leaves and absorb them directly. The flower apparently understood what Bai Xiaochun had told it. From that day on, it didn't grow any larger within the room. However, its roots continued to expand constantly, voraciously even. By now, its roots had spread throughout the cloud order. Furthermore, because moonflowers were not from the heavenspan realm, there was something special about them that made them almost impossible to detect. Therefore, no one noticed what was happening. However, as it grew, it absorbed more and more frigid qi, to the point where the cultivators in the cloud order began to notice that something was off. First of all was the mere fact that there seemed to be less frigid qi than usual. In fact, in some places, the frigid qi was so lacking that the snow began to melt. Eventually, the devas took notice of what was happening. Bai Xiaochun occasionally checked what was happening outside, and when he realized the stir, he patted the moonflower and said, "Moonflower, baby, we don't have much time left. Sooner or later, something bad's going to happen. Not that I care about that, but we can't delay the plan. Is there any way you can grow a bit more quickly? We really need more frigid qi in that leaf." The moonflower quivered, and sent a very vague message back to him. Bai Xiaochun immediately understood. Eyes shining with determination, he pulled a big stack of medicinal pills out of his bag of holding and began handing them over. The moonflower's leaves eagerly swept up the medicinal pills, after which, a massive rumbling sound filled the entire cloud order. All of a sudden, green sprouts shot up from the ground all over the cloud order. Almost as soon as they appeared, they began to suck in the frigid qi, and at the same time, blossom with tiny flowers that looked like moons. Almost immediately, the frigid qi in the cloud order experienced a sharp decline. The cloud order cultivators looked around at the moonflowers, dumbfounded. Within moments, people began to cry out. How could there be plants growing in the cloud order? What kind of flower is that? Heavens! I've never heard of plants appearing in the cloud order before. Aren't all the plants and vegetation that appear in the north specially adapted for the cold? Soon, the entire cloud order was devolving into a huge commotion. It's so hot. Why am I sweating? Hold on, the frigid qi in the cloud order is so weak. Heavens! My igloo, it's melting. Because of the sudden decline in frigid qi, the entire cloud order was starting to melt. In fact, the resulting liquid began to drip down the arm of the huge ice statue that held up the white cloud. The entire sect was soon astir. The devas flew over, expressions of incredulity on their face. Before they could even get to the cloud order, though, the frigid qi declined so rapidly that all of the ice buildings began to collapse. And that was only the beginning. To everyone's stupefaction, the thumb of the enormous ice statue, which was now filled with roots, suddenly began to melt, sending water pouring down the statue. That caused the entire white cloud to tilt to one side. As for the devas, they stared at the thumb of the statue in utter shock. Am I seeing things? The twin master cloud lightnings murmured. Shocked, Feng Chen said, the pride of the north, the ice statue of the northern battle god, his thumb, is gone. Massive rumbling sounds filled the cloud order as buildings collapsed, and freezing water poured down in all directions. Countless disciples flew out into the air and then stared down at the ice statue with its missing thumb. After a momentary silence, there was a huge uproar. How could this be happening? What is that plant? Heavens! What's going on here? How come so much strange stuff is going on? First it was those fantasy pills, and now the battle god's thumb is gone. Moments later, the twin master cloud lightnings, Feng Chen, and the other devas shivered. Expressions flickering with madness, they erupted with rage. Bai Xiaochun. It was definitely you, Bai Xiaochun. Heaven-shaking, earth-shattering roars could be heard as the furious devas shot toward Bai Xiaochun's residence. When the other cultivators from the Cloud Order heard the shouts of the devas, their eyes lit up with ferocious expressions, and they turned to look in Bai Xiaochun's direction. Damn it, this was definitely Bai Xiaochun's handiwork. He's a walking disaster. If he has it out for his disciples, that's one thing, but how could he possibly go so far as to damage the Cloud Order's battle god statue? Kill Bai Xiaochun. Amidst all the shouting, the devas arrived in full fury. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun was inside his residence, nervously watching the frigid qi pouring into the leaf. In the blink of an eye, the leaf was 70% ice. Clearly, if he had enough time, then it would be a simple thing for him to create the ice leaf the baby girl had asked for. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time. When he heard the shouting outside, he quickly grabbed the leaf and threw it into his bag of holding. At the same time, he urgently told the moonflower, get back into seed form. The moonflower didn't need any prompting. It could sense the critical danger, and within moments, it wilted and went dry. All of the life force in the plant was sucked back in until it was nothing more than a seed. There was no time for Bai Xiaochun to look at it closely. Grabbing it, he threw it into his bag of holding along with the leaf. It was in that very moment that a huge boom rang out, and his residence exploded. Bai Xiaochun tumbled off to the side, looking very bedraggled. Surrounding him were countless furious Cloud Order disciples, plus the twin master Cloud Lightnings, Feng Chen, and all the other devas. Everyone looked like they were out for blood. Feeling suicidal, Bai Xiaochun, the twin master Cloud Lightnings raged. Now that Bai Xiaochun's residence was destroyed, the withered husk of the moonflower was out in the open, visible to everyone present. We didn't kill you for selling those fantasy pills, so then you went and struck at the foundation of the north. You will die this day, Bai Xiaochun. Feng Chen was so angry that his eyes overflowed with killing intent. Without any hesitation, he shot toward Bai Xiaochun and unleashed a divine ability of the trump card level. Bai Xiaochun dodged out of the way and then shouted out in a loud voice, are you northerners rebelling against the lands of Heavenspan or something? You've had it out for me from the moment I arrived. First you had your 3-point covenant, and I just endured. Then after I sold some medicinal pills, you changed it to a 4-point covenant. Now I just planted a flower, and you're trying to say I broke the agreement? By now, he had decided to throw caution to the wind. He really had reached the point where he couldn't stand the north. You want to attack me, so you have to come up with a bunch of excuses, don't you? Unleashing the power of his cultivation base, he caused a huge face to appear up in the sky. The twin master Cloud Lightnings and Feng Chen were both frustrated to the extreme by the unspeakable suffering they were enduring. Bai Xiaochun couldn't have been more annoying to them, especially Feng Chen, who had come to find that his idea of the 3-point covenant was turning out to harm himself more than anyone. Back when he came up with the idea, he could never have imagined how much of a disaster Bai Xiaochun could be. A 3-point covenant wasn't nearly enough to contain him, and in fact, it seemed to make him worse. Even more frustrating was how sharp-tongued Bai Xiaochun was, and how special his status was. They obviously couldn't kill him no matter how much they hated him, a fact which was profoundly vexing to all of the devas. By now, their hearts were filled with regret. If they could go back in time, they definitely wouldn't have placed any restrictions on Bai Xiaochun, and would have just let him do whatever he wished. The devas weren't the only ones who felt so torn. The ordinary disciples were both enraged, but at the same time, were wailing in their hearts. Only now did they truly realize how much of a catastrophe Bai Xiaochun could be. This is all Feng Chen's fault. He started out in the lightning order. That's why he had Bai Xiaochun put in the cloud order. He's had it out for us all along. That's right. Send Bai Xiaochun to the lightning order. Release the cloud order from this torment. Our battle god is missing a thumb. The cloud order disciples were truly enraged, and soon, many such shouts filled the air. When Feng Chen heard what everyone was saying, a very unsightly expression appeared on his face, and his hatred for Bai Xiaochun deepened. When the demigod patriarch saw the deadlock, he sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Even he was starting to feel very annoyed with Bai Xiaochun. However, it was exactly as Bai Xiaochun had said. He hadn't violated the covenant in any way. I shouldn't have agreed to any covenant. We can't keep this up. Whenever we tell him not to do something, he thinks of a way to cause a bigger disaster. Frowning, the demigod considered kicking Bai Xiaochun out of the sect. However, considering all the restrictions they had placed on him, if they simply let him go after what he had done, it would be a huge loss of face for the North. Having reached this point in his train of thought, a cold flicker appeared in the demigod's eyes. Instead of making a personal appearance at the Cloud Order, he sent out a dharmic decree. Henceforth, we will have a 5-point covenant. Within the 9 heavens cloud lightning sect, Bai Xiaochun will not tend flowers, plants, animals, or ghosts. He will not forge equipment or concoct pills. He will not plant, refine, raise, or work with anything. His voice echoed out like heavenly thunder, filling the entire sect. However, the cultivators from the Cloud Order and the Devas did not react like they had in the past. Instead, they were worried, and couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before the covenant needed a 6th point, and then a 7th. Every time Bai Xiaochun found a loophole, they would be in deep trouble. Eventually, they could even imagine a scenario in which Bai Xiaochun managed to kill them all, and destroy everything in the northern heavenspan region. The northerners weren't particularly happy with the demigod's dharmic decree, and neither was Bai Xiaochun. As far as Bai Xiaochun was concerned, these northerners were completely outrageous. How could they possibly have added another stipulation to the covenant? Gritting his teeth, he decided to throw caution to the wind yet again. He opened his mouth to speak, in the hopes of getting the demigod to simply kick him out. However, that was when a second dharmic decree was issued. Heavenspan Special Guard Bai Xiaochun, despite not having violated our agreement, harmed the foundation of the Cloud Order. For this crime, he shall be exempt from the death penalty, but will not escape all punishment. Lock him up in Lightning Penitentiary. Until the Heavenspan emissary leaves, all of his freedoms will be restricted. If he resists, take his life. Bai Xiaochun tried to speak up in his defense, but as soon as the dharmic decree echoed out through the sect, a burst of power shot down from the crystal coffin. It transformed into an enormous hand of lightning that grabbed him and forcibly threw him into the black cloud on the other side of the waterfall. The Devas were very excited by this, especially Feng Chen, whose eyes shone brightly. There was little need to mention the ordinary disciples, who went wild with joy upon hearing Bai Xiaochun's fate. He's finally gone. Even demigods would be tormented by the lightning in Lightning Penitentiary. Bai Xiaochun brought this upon himself. This is exactly how it should be. Cheering filled the Cloud Order, and the Devas all sighed in relief as they looked over at the black lightning cloud. A scornful gleam passed through the eyes of the twin master cloud lightnings. No matter what heaven-toppling abilities he has, in the north, he has no choice but to bow his head. Meanwhile, the demigod patriarch in the crystal coffin finally breathed a sigh of relief. Looking over at the Lightning Order's black cloud, he decided that he really had managed to save face for the north. Furthermore, he was absolutely certain that Bai Xiaochun wouldn't cause any problems in Lightning Penitentiary. After all, the worst prisoners imaginable were locked up in Lightning Penitentiary. Although the prison wasn't very full, even demigods who were locked up inside would be tormented to no end, much less devas. Things are finally going to quiet down. The demigod patriarch closed his eyes. The 9 heavens cloud lightning sect had 2 ice statues, one holding up the pure white cloud order, the other holding up the pitch black lightning order. At the moment, a piercing shriek was echoing out deep within the black cloud that housed the lightning order. Of course, it was Bai Xiaochun. I hate the north. It was a shriek filled with bitterness and defiance. However, no matter how loudly he screamed, his voice did not go beyond Lightning Penitentiary, where he had been imprisoned for 3 days already. He was already racked with despair. Within the depths of the black cloud, he was surrounded by layer upon layer of restrictive sealing spells, creating a cell that was only about 30 meters of space in which he could move around. Beyond the borders of the cell were innumerable lightning bolts, each one as thick as an arm and abounding with so much destructive power that it caused Bai Xiaochun's face to go pale. Complete and utter bullying, he muttered, shivering as he sat there, looking out at the darkness and the lightning. Calling out to the heavens and cursing the hells brought not even the slightest response. As far as Bai Xiaochun was concerned, this was the unluckiest he had ever been in his entire life. Completely ridiculous. 3-point covenant, 4-point covenant, 5-point covenant. All of that I could deal with. But I can't believe they actually locked me up. He felt like he was about to go crazy, and couldn't come up with any effective methods to do anything about the situation. Not only could he not escape, every few hours, lightning would gather around his cell and then strike him repeatedly. There was only one way to deal with the shocking lightning, and that was to draw upon his cultivation base power. Unfortunately, Lightning Penitentiary was cut off from the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which led Bai Xiaochun to the conclusion that, eventually, he would run out of power to stave off the lightning. What am I supposed to do? He sighed. Right now, his main hope was that Du Lingfei would finish her mission soon and come to free him. I'm gonna remember this, you northerners, he said loudly. You just wait. After I become a demigod, I'm going to get my revenge. With that, he let out a roar of frustration. However, as soon as he did, a sarcastic chuckle could be heard from off to the side. Become a demigod? Even then you won't be able to get revenge. Who's there? Bai Xiaochun said, looking around. His divine sense had been restricted as soon as he was thrown into his cell, but his ordinary senses had not. However, during the past 3 days, he hadn't detected any signs of life anywhere nearby. As he looked around vigilantly, he saw the clouds off to the side seething, and then gradually turning translucent, revealing another cell roughly 300 meters away. It was also 30 meters across, formed by countless restrictive spells. Just like his own cell, it was surrounded by dancing lightning, which occasionally shot into the cell to strike at an emaciated figure who sat there cross-legged. It was an old man wearing threadbare garments. He was little more than skin and bones, and his aura was very weak. Whenever the lightning struck him, he would shiver slightly, and yet, his expression never changed. Apparently, while he couldn't stop the physical torment of the lightning bolts, his mind had long since grown used to the pain. His hand was currently settling back down onto his knee. Apparently, not even the restrictive spells could completely hold his will in check, allowing him the basic ability to control the clouds around him. When Bai Xiaochun looked into the old man's eyes, it felt like his eyes were being stabbed, eliciting a gasp. Listen, kid, I'm a demigod, and even I'm stuck here. So my advice is that you adjust that little oath of yours. Maybe you can aim for becoming a celestial? The man grinned, and as his yellowish teeth were illuminated by the lightning, he looked particularly sinister. Bai Xiaochun shivered. I've been in here for years now, the man continued, and I can tell you that people who get locked up here don't tend to last for long. Now that I think about it, it's been a while since anybody new came around. Come, kid, can you dance? Do a sexy little dance for me, and if I like it, I might just give you a secret magic that can help you deal with the pain. The old man eyed Bai Xiaochun up and down, eyes shining with a bizarre light as he chuckled. Bai Xiaochun had been startled by the man's sudden appearance, but had now recovered. And he could sense that he and this man were similar in that, after having been locked up, they both got a bit braver. Glaring at the man, he said, "Shut up, old man. I worked as a prison guard in the past, and eventually I lost track of how many prisoners like you I mopped the floor with." Snorting coldly, he stuck his chin up and looked away. The old man laughed heartily. The stubborn type, huh? I really like young bucks like you. You know, 3,000 years ago there was another stubborn punk who got locked up here. He only lasted a month before he was twisting and turning in front of me, begging for my secret magic. Whenever you're ready, I'll be waiting for you. Apparently, he was very pleased at the additional amusement that Bai Xiaochun had brought into his life. Bai Xiaochun was already feeling quite annoyed at this man's gaze and laughter. After giving him another good glare, he ignored him. After all, he just needed to wait for Du Lingfei to finish her mission, and then she would come back and think of a way to get him out. 2 hours later, the lightning around his cell began to build up more and more, creating something like a lightning storm around him. When the lightning storm struck, he drew upon his cultivation base to defend himself. The sight of all that lightning was really shocking. After all, the destructive power in only one bolt wasn't anything to really worry about, but from what he could tell, there were hundreds of thousands of them. He wasn't the only one to have to deal with the lightning in that moment. The old man was also struck. However, the man's expression didn't so much as flicker because of it. Instead, he looked over at Bai Xiaochun with ill intentions flickering in his eyes. You still have spiritual power now, so you can defend yourself. But in another 10 days or so, you'll run out. And that's when you'll really start to enjoy yourself. The power of the lightning builds up over time, you know. Eventually, it reaches the point of being the most horrific suffering in heaven and earth. Although the old man trembled physically as he spoke, it didn't affect his voice at all. You know what I love to hear the most? The screams of people getting struck by lightning. I just close my eyes and revel in the beauty of it. Licking his lips, he gazed at Bai Xiaochun, his eyes brimming with malice. Bai Xiaochun was in no mood to pay any attention to the man. The lightning continued to strike him for a full hour before finally fading away. In the process, a large portion of his spiritual power was drained away. He now only had 70% left, a fact that caused an unsightly expression to appear on his face. This isn't going to work, he thought, looking around apprehensively at all the lightning. After some calculations, he came to the conclusion that his spiritual power really would be drained in about 10 days. Although he was confident in his fleshly body power, the fact that this old man, a demigod, was in such tattered shape, left him worried that he wouldn't be able to match up. 5 more days flew by. Whenever the lightning struck, his spiritual power levels got lower and lower, and the cackles of the old man grew louder. Bai Xiaochun was feeling very frustrated. On the sixth day, however, he suddenly looked up, his eyes bloodshot as he stared at the surrounding lightning bolts. He had considered many options, but none had seemed viable. That meant he only had one choice left. Back on the heaven-span sea, when eldest brother was going through his tribulation, I actually consumed the tribulation cloud. That cloud had lightning in it, and in addition to the destructive power it contained, it also had life force. I'm pretty sure my apprentice was helping me back then, so it's hard to say if I can do the same thing in here. After vacillating for some time, he saw the lightning building up into a storm, and he gritted his teeth. Might as well give it a shot. He rose to his feet, drawing upon his cultivation base, although not in a way to defend himself. Hundreds of thousands of lightning bolts swirled into a massive storm then pierced into his cell and appeared right in front of him. Just as it was about to smash into him, he roared, opened his mouth, and sucked in a breath. The old man was initially stunned, but then began to laugh in mocking fashion. Another fool who thinks he can consume the lightning. Looking to die, huh? Years ago, I called myself the lightning ancestor, and was the only rogue cultivator demigod in the north. But not even I dared to try to consume lightning bolts. Over all the years that I've been here, I've seen a lot of, what? All of a sudden, the old man's eyes bulged so wide that they nearly dropped out of his head. Freaking. What? What are you doing? Despite the crashing lightning which surrounded him, the lightning ancestor was so shocked he very nearly leapt to his feet. As Bai Xiaochun inhaled, he sucked in 10 lightning bolts. He did so with the utmost caution, and after breathing them in, he unleashed the power of his cultivation base to protect himself from further attacks. Afterward, it was to Bai Xiaochun's delight that he found that he could easily break the lightning down inside of him, sending shocking power coursing through his energy passageways. The 10 bolts of lightning were equivalent to 10 days of ordinary cultivation. His eyes began to shine brightly, and he was already panting in excitement. Looking around at the lightning, he no longer seemed scared, but instead, worked up. I actually did it. Reining in the power of his cultivation base, he took another deep breath, this time sucking in 100 lightning bolts. From a distance, it looked like numerous glowing dragons roaring and howling as they were consumed by Bai Xiaochun. A healthy flush covered his face as crackling sounds filled him, which came from spiritual power equivalent to 100 days of cultivation. That much spiritual power caused his heart to begin to race with excitement. Without the slightest hesitation, he began to work on his sun-moon vast sky incantation. By this point, the outline of a moon was rapidly forming inside of him. Furthermore, his aura was now much stronger than before. The lightning ancestor watched with a blank expression on his face as this unimaginable scene played out. He had been born and raised in the north, and was a demigod. Back in his glory days, he had called himself the lightning ancestor because of his deep and profound skill with thunder and lightning. However, not even he would dare to consume lightning. He knew better than anyone that the lightning bolts in the 9 heavens cloud lightning sect were extraordinary, and were reflections of the will of heaven and earth. The destructive power they contained was enough to shatter virtually anything in creation. Therefore, the scene playing out right now caused his mind to spin, and made it difficult for him to breathe. Don't tell me that I was wrong all along, and the lightning really can be consumed? He suddenly wondered if all of his time in incarceration had been a huge lie. Barely able to think straight, he suddenly opened his mouth and tried to breathe in some of the surrounding lightning bolts. A few dozen bolts entered his mouth, whereupon his eyes nearly exploded. A blood-curdling scream erupted out, and then he began to shake violently and cough up blood. He only recovered after a long moment passed, whereupon he looked over with hidden bitterness at Bai Xiaochun, who was in the middle of breathing in a third batch of lightning bolts. This time, he breathed in several hundred bolts, and looked like he was nearly drunk with enjoyment. The clear difference between himself and Bai Xiaochun caused the lightning ancestor's heart to be slammed by waves of shock. Furthermore, the unfairness of it all almost drove him to madness. How could this be happening? It's impossible. I'm a demigod. I'm the lightning ancestor of yore. Even as he descended into madness, the current lightning storm faded away. After consuming several hundred lightning bolts, Bai Xiaochun could tell that he was almost finished with the first level of the sun-moon vast sky incantation. Licking his lips, he sat down and began to wait eagerly for the next lightning storm. This 9 heavens cloud lightning sect is actually treating me pretty well. They locked me up in a place most people find a torment, but for me, is a truly blessed land. The more he thought about it, the more excited he got, until he finally stood back up and started laughing out loud. When the lightning ancestor saw that he really wasn't hurt at all, and that his cultivation base had actually progressed, a wave of excitement rose up in him. Eyes shining, he cried out, "Hey, old pal." Eyebrows dancing up and down, Bai Xiaochun looked over and said, "What you want, ya old monkey?" The lightning ancestor's face twitched at having been called old monkey, which was obviously payback for how he had called Bai Xiaochun a young buck. "So, how did you do that, old pal?" The lightning ancestor tried to make sure that he was the picture of amiability, as though he didn't mind being called old monkey at all. After he finished speaking, he simply sat there, looking at Bai Xiaochun with anticipation. The truth was that he had been locked up in this place for many years, and had seen far too many people killed by the lightning. He had seen some people try to swallow the lightning just the way Bai Xiaochun had, except that they all died as a result. Others had been unable to take the torment and committed suicide. This was his first time seeing anyone succeed at swallowing lightning. Not only had Bai Xiaochun come out unscathed, his cultivation base had been refined in the process. Come, old monkey," Bai Xiaochun said proudly, swishing his sleeve. "Can you dance? Do a sexy little dance for me, and if I like it, I might just give you a secret magic that can help you deal with the pain." "You," the lightning ancestor shouted angrily. He was a demigod, and despite having been locked up in prison for so many years, still had his pride. Not even the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning Sect's demigod patriarch had ever treated him disrespectfully. But in response to his anger, Bai Xiaochun glared right back at him. Veins began to bulge out on the lightning ancestor's face and neck, and his eyes turned as dark as night. A moment passed, and then he stood up and clenched his fists. Although he had long since been drained of spiritual power, he still emanated the pressure of a demigod, which caused rumbling sounds to echo out. In response, the clouds in the area began to churn and roil, startling Bai Xiaochun to the point where he backed up a few steps. Then the gaunt, almost emaciated lightning ancestor took a deep breath, and began to twist and turn according to some peculiar rhythm. There was actually something lithe and elegant to his movements. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide at the sight of it, and he almost forgot to breathe. Almost unable to take the sight, he backed up and said wryly, You're really dancing." The lightning ancestor ignored Bai Xiaochun, continuing to dance for a bit before sitting back down. Then he glanced out at Bai Xiaochun out of the corner of his eye, looking very proud and aloof as he said, "So what? I've been locked up here for a long time, and had to come up with some way to pass the time. When I'm bored, I do a bit of dancing. 3 circles on the left, 3 circles on the right, shake those shoulders, shake that butt." "What, I'm not allowed to do that or something?" 1. Upon hearing such a reasonable argument, which was clearly backed by conviction, a look of admiration appeared in Bai Xiaochun's eyes. All of a sudden, he realized that this lightning ancestor was clearly a genius. Most people would go crazy after being imprisoned for so many years, but this old man had figured out a way to pass the time. "Senior," he said with complete sincerity, "considering your dancing abilities, I think that after I get free, I'm definitely going to give you a nice collection of medicinal pills." At that point, the lightning ancestor looked over at Bai Xiaochun with shining eyes. "Alright, cut the crap. You called me an old monkey and I danced for you. Now, are you going to teach me how to consume that lightning?" Seeing how hard the old man had worked to get what he wanted further increased the admiration Bai Xiaochun felt in his heart. With that, he went on to explain a little bit about the lightning. Leaving out any guesses about Bai Hao, he explained that he had once consumed some heavenly tribulation, and had sensed that it contained life force. That was what gave him the inspiration to consume the lightning bolts here in Lightning Penitentiary. The lightning ancestor didn't believe that at all, but to his frustration, no further questioning got anywhere. Eventually, another lightning storm built up, and Bai Xiaochun excitedly consumed more lightning and proceeded on with more cultivation. That in turn caused the lightning ancestor's envy to grow. After 10 days passed, Bai Xiaochun had consumed enough lightning to get his sun-moon vast sky incantation to the great circle of the first level. He was now just on the verge of breaking through to the second level. Finally, the lightning ancestor couldn't take it anymore. Looking over at Bai Xiaochun, he said, "Hey, old pal, it seems to me that the two of us were destined to meet each other here. You know, I can tell that you hate the North quite a bit, and so do I. We're essentially allies. How about you teach me that lightning absorption technique, and I'll promise to help you take care of the North after we get out. What do you say?" Bai Xiaochun glanced at the lightning ancestor but didn't respond. Continuing to absorb lightning, he pushed his sun-moon vast sky incantation closer and closer to the next level. According to his calculations, it would only take a few more lightning storms to achieve his breakthrough. When the lightning ancestor realized that he was being ignored, he gritted his teeth and loudly said, "Listen, my friend, I have a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering divine ability. Want to trade?" However, Bai Xiaochun didn't even look over at him, causing his anxiety to mount. It's really an incredible divine ability. It's called the 100 Cloud Lightning Forefather Transformations. The 9 Heavens Cloud Lightning sect has it too, but it's an incomplete version. Cultivating that version will cause your divine soul to split apart. However, I have the full version, and it's beyond belief. Stunned, Bai Xiaochun looked over at him. What did you say it's called? The 100 Cloud Lightning Forefather Transformations. Bai Xiaochun was more than a little surprised. He knew of this divine ability, and had personally fought against it. It was Master Cloud Lightning's trump card. After combining into his united form, he had used the 8th transformation to become the forefather of all humanity, which was the first time that Bai Xiaochun's undying Emperor's fist had ever been defeated. That memory remained fresh in Bai Xiaochun's mind, and in fact, he often thought about that technique, which had been used against him. Sadly, it was a secret magic of the North that was never passed on to foreigners. Besides, even among Northerners, the people who qualified to cultivate it could be counted on one hand. And yet, contrary to all expectation, this old man said that the technique actually encompassed 100 transformations. Bai Xiaochun very nearly gasped as a result, but managed to keep his true reaction concealed. Glaring over at the lightning ancestor, he said, "Who do you think you're fooling, you old monkey? Do you think I've never seen the Cloud Lightning Forefather divine ability before?" The lightning ancestor blinked a few times. However, he didn't show any of the embarrassment he might have if he had been trying to pull a scam. Actually, he had hoped that the name of the technique would attract Bai Xiaochun's attention. Smacking his forehead, he laughed dryly and said, "I'm getting old, and my memory isn't what it used to be. I just remembered that it's actually the 11 Cloud Lightning Forefather transformations. I'm definitely not mistaken this time. It has 11 transformations." In order to prove that what he was saying was completely and utterly trustworthy, he went on to add some more information. The first 9 transformations allow a cultivator to form a Dharma idol of the forefather of all humanity. Then they can merge with that Dharma idol to become the forefather. The 10th transformation turns one's left eye into a shining moon, and the 11th transformation, which is the most shocking of all, turns the right eye into a blazing sun. Although there are 11 transformations, the final 2 transformations are far more powerful than the others. In fact, they each have an additional 3 levels of transformation power. That means that if you cultivate the technique in its entirety, it essentially has the power of 17 transformations. By this point, Bai Xiaochun was completely stunned, and his heart was racing. "The 9 Heavens Cloud Lightning sect coveted my technique," the lightning ancestor continued, "and used contemptible means to steal it from me. However, they never got the final 2 transformations. In fact, that's why they imprisoned me here, in the hopes of getting them." As of now, he could see that Bai Xiaochun was intrigued, and therefore he went on to brag a bit more. As to whether his boasting was truthful or not, only he could tell. Bai Xiaochun wasn't very convinced that the 9 Heavens Cloud Lightning sect would imprison this person just to get 2 transformations. There were simply too many methods that could be used to extract such information. For example, they could put a person like Bai Xiaochun into the prison as a mole, and fool the lightning ancestor into giving up the information willingly. But he was still intrigued, especially by what the lightning ancestor had said about the 11th transformation, that it could transform the left eye into a bright moon. "I cultivate the sun-moon vast sky incantation, but it's incomplete. It only contains the moon incantation. If I could break through to the Great Circle, I could get my cultivation base to the mid-diva realm. But that's impossible, since it's incomplete. But this 11th forefather transformation has to do with a moon. I wonder if I could combine them." Having reached this point in his train of thought, his heart began to beat even faster. Although he couldn't be sure of whether or not it would work, he decided that he had to try. However, he also realized that he couldn't let that show. This old monkey had been locked up for long enough that his brain seemed to be a bit addled, but he was still a demigod expert, after all. Getting the technique from him would come at a price, and Bai Xiaochun knew that if he wasn't careful, he could end up with a flawed version. If that happened, it could cause problems for his cultivation base. Furthermore, he had no idea how exactly he was able to consume lightning, and therefore had no way to pass that information on to the old man as payment. "I need to convince him that he doesn't need the technique itself, only the spiritual energy." Since it was impossible to pass on the lightning-consuming technique, he would need to think of a way to take the energy of heaven and earth that he had absorbed and transfer it to the lightning ancestor. The key to that would be to alter the structure of the lightning. Ignoring the lightning ancestor, he continued consuming some lightning, and worked on a way to do just that. The lightning ancestor waited for some time, but when it became clear that Bai Xiaochun wasn't very interested, he began to get more anxious. Another 7 days went by. Bai Xiaochun continued to work on his cultivation, and his aura continued to grow more powerful. The endless amount of lightning bolts in the lightning penitentiary were the perfect fuel for cultivation, and over the week which had passed, he had consumed well over 10,000 bolts. A quick calculation revealed that he had already accomplished a whole 60-year cycle's worth of cultivation. It was so shocking that he almost couldn't believe it was true. The Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning Sect is truly the ultimate land of good fortune for me. At this point, his Sun-Moon Vast Sky incantation had reached the great circle of the second level. At this rate, it will only be half a month before I break through to the third level and reach the peak of the early Diva realm. He was so excited that, even if the demigod patriarch of the sect came to free him, he would definitely come up with a way to make sure he stayed locked up. In fact, if I can break out of the third level, then my cultivation base should reach the mid-Diva realm. If I reach the mid-Diva realm, then Master Cloud Lightning wouldn't count for crap against me. And that numbskull Feng Chen couldn't touch me. I wouldn't even be scared of all of the northern devas put together. His eyes glittered as he imagined that glorious scene, and then he mused about how much he had fallen in love with this lightning. Another thing he had worked on was the ability to remove the destructive power of the lightning and leave behind only the spiritual energy. So far, he was only able to succeed with 1 out of 10 lightning bolts, and even that was difficult. Meanwhile, the lightning ancestor sat there watching the excited Bai Xiaochun's aura get stronger and stronger as he consumed the lightning bolts. Eventually, he couldn't hold back any longer. "Hey, old pal," he said. "Come on, why don't we trade techniques? You teach me how to consume the lightning, and I'll teach you the 11 cloud lightning forefather transformations." "Not interested," Bai Xiaochun replied, not even looking over as he continued to consume lightning bolts. "This is a classified secret magic," he said anxiously. "There are only a few techniques in all of the lands of Heavenspan that can compare to it." "I said I'm not interested. Can you quiet down a bit? Don't even think about getting my lightning-consuming technique. There's no way." Frowning in annoyance, he continued to work on absorbing lightning. The lightning ancestor was so angry he almost started blurting out curses. In fact, he had already decided that he would try to get Bai Xiaochun to unwillingly cultivate his transformation technique in a way that would get him to split into 2 parts. However, on the outside, he could only continue to smile. By this point, he had come to the conclusion that it wasn't so much that Bai Xiaochun wasn't interested in his technique. Rather, he prized his lightning-consuming technique so much that he wasn't willing to trade it for anything. And he had nothing else to bargain with. Gritting his teeth, he said, "If you can't give me the technique, can you maybe pass some of the energy of heaven and earth over to me? I'll trade my technique for that." Bai Xiaochun's heart immediately began to pound. However, he continued to pretend to be disinterested. The lightning ancestor continued to pepper him with questions, though, until he finally waved his hand, causing one of the lightning bolts to sweep through his body, dispelled its destructive nature, and then returned it to the palm of his hand. "I'm somewhat interested in that technique of yours, but I don't have the time to cultivate it now. You want some consumable lightning, right? Here, take a bolt. And then shut up, keep quiet, and don't bother me." A rumbling sound echoed out as the bolt of lightning he had just cleansed passed through the restrictive spell and shot toward the lightning ancestor. The lightning ancestor was stunned. Never could he have imagined that the spiritual energy he had worked so hard to get would be thrown over to him so casually. In fact, he didn't even need to give up his technique to get it, just leave Bai Xiaochun alone. There was no time to contemplate the matter at length right now. He could tell that there was something different about this bolt of lightning, and therefore, he quickly breathed it in. Instantly, cracking sounds rang out as his parched insides were suddenly enlivened. Although there wasn't much spiritual energy in the lightning bolt, it had been 10,000 years since he had absorbed even the slightest bit. To him, it was such a beauteous thing that he immediately began to shiver. "Hey, old pal, can you please just stop annoying me?" Arg. Looking very angry, Bai Xiaochun threw over another lightning bolt. Worried that he would irritate Bai Xiaochun too much, the lightning ancestor quickly absorbed the lightning and then kept his mouth shut. A few more days passed, but Bai Xiaochun never even looked his way, causing his anxiety to grow. If he hadn't been given any of the spiritual energy to begin with, he might have continued to be jealous, but would have been able to control himself. But now, having tasted the sweet taste of that energy, his thirst was growing more and more intense. He began cautiously. Bai Xiaochun looked over with a glare and threw him another bolt of lightning. And that was how the following several days went. Eventually, it reached the point where Bai Xiaochun had given him 8 lightning bolts. The lightning ancestor's desire mounted, and he came to be more and more convinced that Bai Xiaochun really didn't care about the divine ability. If he did, why would he never say anything about it? All he asked for was silence. From the way Bai Xiaochun threw the lightning bolts out, it was like he was a rich moneybags, and the lightning ancestor was a beggar. During the time that passed, Bai Xiaochun reached the 3rd level of the Sun-Moon Vast Sky incantation. His aura was now more powerful than ever, and finally, he began to think about the lightning ancestor's 11 cloud lightning forefather transformations. One day after just having thrown out another lightning bolt, he casually said, "Hey, old monkey. Tell me more about this supposed 100 cloud lightning forefather transformations or whatever it is that you're always bragging about." Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.